What is going on, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be recapping every single top 25 game from week 5 of the 2024 college football season. And I will also recap the new updated AP poll after week 5 at the end of this video. But let's start off with talking about the Friday night game between number 7 Miami and Virginia Tech. This is the first game we really had to see Miami overcome adversity, and they definitely had a tough test against a Virginia Tech team that actually played a lot better than they have before in the season. Kyron Jones had some pretty nice plays, and Tootin was hard to stop at the running back position. Virginia Tech moved the ball super well, but their defense could not keep up with Miami. Miami had 500 total yards of offense and won this game 38-34. Cam Ward has some mistakes and 2 interceptions, but he still played a pretty good game, and he helped this team win a crucial game. And if Virginia Tech would have converted that Hail Mary, this would have been a bad loss for Miami. This would have been the second consecutive season in a row where they would start 4-1. And I know Miami was a big favorite against Virginia Tech, but I really do think this was a pretty big win for Mario Cristobal. This could be a win that kind of gets them over that hump because now they are 5-0 and they are heading in the right path and they are an ACC title contender. Let's now move on to the Saturday games. We have number 1 Texas beating Mississippi State 35-13. I actually predicted Mississippi State to cover the spread. I had a feeling it was going to be a weird SEC opener for Texas where they would start off slow and not run up the score. And this game kind of went how I expected it to go. Arch Manning continues to play really good. He was super efficient, going 26 for 31 with 324 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Texas is definitely a team to watch out for. Let's now talk about the game of the week and maybe the game of the year between number 2 Georgia and number 4 Alabama. This game was absolutely incredible. This actually might be the craziest game of this season. There were so many highlight reel plays and a lot of offense in this game. Ryan Williams had a crazy 75-yard reception touchdown. These two teams combined for over 1,000 yards, and the quarterbacks were phenomenal in this game despite Carson Beck having a somewhat slower start. Georgia would have won this game if they had a somewhat reliable rushing attack, but Carson Beck had to carry that offense, throwing for over 400 yards. Georgia really got dominated at the line of scrimmage and had no run game, and that just goes to show how much pressure was on Carson Beck in this game. Because they almost came back and won this game, and a lot was on Carson Beck to lead that comeback. But Jalen Milroe and that Alabama offense was way too much. People need to put respect on Jalen Milroe's name. He is a legit Heisman finalist. The dude was super efficient, but he also passed for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he ran for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. He continues to be dominant running the ball and a lot better of a passer than he was last season. So anybody who is still saying Jalen Milroe cannot play the quarterback position just has to be wrong at this point. I don't know how you could deny this guy's greatness. The next game was number 3 Ohio State dominated Michigan State 38-7. Nothing much to say about this game. I was expecting Ohio State to win this game by around 30 points. Jeremiah Smith continues to put up highlight plays, and Emeka Egbuka actually had a great game too. Ohio State played really good defensively, forcing 3 turnovers, and they just completely dominated this game. This was another big win for Ohio State. They haven't played anybody yet, but they do look like one of the best teams in the country. Let's now talk about the massive upset Kentucky had over the number 6 team in the country, Ole Miss. I should have had Ole Miss on upset alert knowing how Kentucky played against Georgia a few weeks back. Kentucky is a scrappy team and they play very tough defensively. And Ole Miss hadn't played anybody yet, so this game really caught up to them. You gotta give props to Mark Stoops for always having his team ready to play. He didn't have them ready to play against South Carolina when they lost 31-6, but this was a huge win for Kentucky. I predicted Kentucky to take a step back, but right now it looks like this team is heading towards another 7 or 8 win season with Mark Stoops. Ole Miss has potential to turn it around. They don't have a super tough schedule. They get Georgia at home and they still have LSU and Oklahoma, but those are all manageable games. So I'm not completely giving up on Ole Miss, but man, this was a tough loss for them. We also had the game between number 8 Oregon and UCLA. This was such a weird game. Oregon was up 28-3. They were about to score at halftime. And then Oregon threw a pick 6 and they just let off the brakes, and UCLA kept this game somewhat close and they covered. Oregon only scored 6 points in the second half and they were all in the fourth quarter. This was a very weird game. It looked like they let off the brakes. But regardless, they beat UCLA 34-13. Dylan Gabriel continues to be super efficient, and he passed for nearly 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in this game. And Oregon's defense continues to get better. They got some guys back from injury, and they held UCLA to under 200 yards. And UCLA's only touchdown was defensively. So Oregon had a good offensive performance in this game, but it was the defense that impressed me in this game. And if Oregon could play great on both sides of the ball, they are going to be a dangerous team, and I'm still high on the Oregon Ducks. We also had number 9 Penn State beating Illinois 21-7 in a lower scoring game. I picked Illinois to cover, and they did cover. Illinois kept this game close for a majority of the game, but Penn State went on a 14-0 run in the second half. Penn State's defense looks extremely dominant. They held Illinois to only 219 yards, and they forced 2 turnovers. Illinois' offense just looked much different against Penn State than it did against Nebraska. They made work against a pretty solid Nebraska defense, but they could not move the ball against Penn State, and Luke Altmyer didn't play a great game, and he had an interception. He didn't play a bad game, he played an okay game, but it wasn't enough to get the upset on the road against Penn State. And Penn State managed to win this game 21-7. USC was a bit concerning in Week 5, but they really turned it up in the second half. They have had some slow starts to the first half this season. They started slow against Michigan. They also started somewhat slow against LSU. They started slow against Wisconsin too, but they ended up going on a 28-0 run in the second half and won the game by 17 points. This was a pretty good win for USC, and they are definitely ready for the Big Ten. Maybe they aren't going to win the Big Ten. Maybe they still have some issues on the offensive line, but this team is probably going to win 8, 9, or even 10 games this year, and they could be a fringe playoff contender. I'm still keeping an eye on this USC team. The defense is definitely improved. I don't think anybody can argue against that, and they have a quarterback in Miller Moss who has been playing pretty well. They need to get somewhat of a run game going, but it's hard to do that against good defensive front sevens when you don't have a great offensive line. That's the reason they lost to Michigan. That might be the reason they lose to Penn State, and who knows, they could drop another game on that schedule. They still play Notre Dame. They have a path to the playoffs, but this is kind of a reload year for USC, and it is going to be tough for them. But USC has definitely overexceeded expectations so far this season. I totally skipped over a couple of games, and one of the games I skipped over was the Arizona versus Utah game. And Arizona pulled off a big upset on the road against Utah, who hardly loses at home. This was a pretty solid win for Arizona. Their defense continues to get better. The Big 12 is so confusing, and these teams are playing so up and down. I don't know who is going to win the Big 12. It's still absolutely wide open. But I do think Arizona kind of revived themselves in this game, and they still have a shot at the Big 12 championship. If some other receivers can step up outside of Tetairoa McMillan and that offense can play a little bit better, they have a shot. Burnett stepped up in this game with 5 receptions for 76 yards and 1 touchdown for Arizona. And Noah Fifita continues to ball. He hasn't had a super impressive year and he's not getting a lot of recognition, but this is a guy that was considered a top 10 quarterback last season. And this was definitely a big win for Arizona, beating the number 10 team Utah on the road. Utah really needs to get Cam Rising back. Isaac Wilson has had some good moments, but he is only a true freshman. And Cam Rising is really the heart and soul of this team. So if Cam Rising can come back and this team could start playing out their expectation, then maybe they can win the Big 12. But there are still some concerning things with Utah, and their offense needs some work. We also had number 12 Michigan slip away from Minnesota. Minnesota was so close to winning this game. They had an onside kick that got called back for some stupid reason, and Michigan ended up winning the game 27-24. They really let off the gas, and this has to be a tough performance for Michigan, knowing how it started. Michigan is just too one-dimensional, and I don't see this team making the playoffs. Definitely if they can't beat Minnesota by more than a touchdown. They can't have a game where they pass for over 100 yards. Alex Orji continues to just look blah. But I will say the running game is super good, and Mullings is a beast for them at running back. We'll see what they can do, but there's still a lot of things this Michigan squad needs to clean up. And they actually got outgained in yards by Minnesota in this game. LSU also beat South Alabama 42-10. There are some people taking South Alabama plus 20 or something like that. I don't exactly know what the spread is, but I knew LSU was going to cover. People were overreacting because South Alabama scored 80-something points on an FCS school, and they managed to blow out a bad App State team. Because let's face it, App State is just not what we expected them to be this year. And South Alabama had no shot in this game. LSU is just a much more talented team, and they definitely showed up to play in this game, and Garrett Nussmeier is still putting up numbers. He threw for 400 yards in this game. This was definitely a great offensive performance from LSU, and they do move to 4-1. We also had Notre Dame get their revenge and beat Louisville 31-24. Last season, Louisville really dominated Notre Dame, so you'd have to believe Notre Dame had this game circled, and they definitely came out to play in this game. The offense is starting to get going a little bit more, and Riley Leonard looks super efficient in this game. He only had 160 yards passing, but he was 17 for 23, and he did not turn the ball over. They also got a pretty good run game, and their defense did enough to win them this game for them. Louisville may have outgained Notre Dame by over 100 yards, but Notre Dame ended up winning it. Sometimes games just go like that. Louisville and Notre Dame are both borderline playoff contenders for me. I've had them both in my playoff at some point this season. I've went back and forth. But after seeing Louisville go down the way they did, I don't know who I'm going to have in my 12-team playoff this week. But this was definitely a big win for Notre Dame, and this leads them in the right direction. We also saw Clemson play a weird game against Stanford. They ended up beating Stanford 40-14. But this game was much closer than that box score says. Stanford was really playing Clemson close in this game. Clemson only outgained Stanford in yards by 40, but Stanford just could not execute in this game. They were absolutely terrible in the red zone, and Ashton Daniels just does not cut it at the quarterback position for Stanford, and he really sold them this game. Look, I'm trying to take this Clemson team more seriously. They have been impressive. They have been blowing out teams, but I really want to see them play a good defense before I overreact and rank them really high. But if they do manage to beat Louisville in comfortable fashion, this team could be an ACC winner, and I'm not joking. I can't believe I'm saying this because I said they had no shot at winning the ACC earlier in the season. But with how bad the ACC looks, Clemson does have a shot, and some of those freshman receivers are stepping up for them. We'll see how they do when they play Louisville, and they will have to compete with a very good Miami team for the ACC. But I gotta be honest, and I have to say there is a path for Clemson. We also had Iowa State beating Houston 20-0. Once again, Houston gets shut out. They got shut out twice this season. I forgot the other team that shut them out, but they also only scored 7 points against UNLV. Houston's offense is terrible. I think they are legitimately the worst Power 4 team. I mean, they're even worse than Florida State is. Iowa State's defense continues to play at a very high level. They are legitimately looking like one of the best defenses, not just in the Big 12, but in the country with how many points they are holding teams to. The offense didn't play great in this game, but they have showed some promise this season, and Iowa State is a legit Big 12 title contender. A lot of people aren't talking about them. They're not a super flashy team, but they are a well-coached team. They have a lot of experience, and they know how to win games. So definitely keep an eye on this Iowa State team. We also saw Oklahoma State just completely get destroyed by Kansas State. I kind of seen this coming. Oklahoma State has looked very concerning. The defense does not look good, and they can't get anything going with Ollie Gordon. That was part of the reason this team was really good and made the Big 12 championship last game. It's because of a guy like Ollie Gordon. But they've become somewhat one-dimensional offensively. I will say they did a little bit better running the ball in this game, but it still wasn't enough, and their defense is just not good at all. I really can't take Oklahoma State that seriously anymore. I know Kansas State had that bad loss to BYU, but they actually outgained BYU. And BYU had so many things go their way in that game. I think that's a weird game to look back on, but I really think Kansas State is going to have a bounce-back year, and maybe they make it back to the Big 12 championship. But this was definitely a good win for Kansas State. Avery Johnson continues to play super well, and that run game is dominant. Kansas State beats Oklahoma State 42-20. What about Auburn? Being the best team, I'll always find ways to lose games. You thought I was about to praise Auburn. This Auburn team is so bad. I will say they should definitely keep Peyton Thorne as the starter. He definitely turns the ball over a lot, but he gives them their best shot at winning games, and I can't believe I'm saying that. Hank Brown is just not the guy, and they don't have any other quarterbacks on that roster, and sometimes that's just how it is. Auburn still managed to lose this game despite outgaining Oklahoma by 200 yards. Michael Hawkins Jr. really had a breakout game. He had 161 passing yards, not great, but he was also super efficient, and he was their leading rusher. I think he gives Oklahoma their best chance at winning games for now. Maybe when Oklahoma gets their receivers back from injury, Jackson Arnold would be the better starter. But right now, I do think it is smart that they are rolling with Hawkins Jr. because he definitely gives them something in the run game as a quarterback. Oklahoma is definitely kind of a rebuilding team this year. They have a pretty bad offensive line, but this was a solid win for Oklahoma on the road in a hostile environment. But let's be real, Auburn is just not that good this year. We'll see what Oklahoma could do the rest of the year, but I don't have high expectations for Oklahoma or Auburn. BYU also won another game to move to 5-0. They almost blew the lead to Baylor, but they did end up winning it 34-28. They pulled away in the end, and that's all that matters. I was expecting more of a low-scoring game, but it ended up being more of a shootout, which was surprising to me. This wasn't a super clean game. You had 2 turnovers from both teams, but BYU managed to win the game. They were the better coached team in this game. So give props to BYU for moving to 5-0. This is huge for them. Texas A&M also won a low-scoring game against Arkansas. I picked the under in this game, but that was a very easy prediction. These two defenses are pretty solid, and Mike Elko leads Texas A&M to a 4-1 start. They had a tough start to the season losing to Notre Dame, but they have bounced back and they have won 4 in a row. but the schedule only gets tougher. They play Missouri next week. Texas A&M is kind of in the same boat as Oklahoma for me. They have a quarterback problem, but they have a really good defense. I picked Arkansas to win this game, so I was surprised with the outcome, but this was definitely a good win for Texas A&M. They did manage to come back and beat Arkansas 21-17. Turnovers really cost Arkansas this game though, because they had 3 of them. And lastly, Ashton Jeanty puts on another Heisman-like performance. Boise State beats Washington State 45-24. And they gave Washington State their first loss of the season, and they really shut down a pretty solid Washington State offense, and that Boise State defense is starting to play better. This is a dangerous group of 5 team. What Ashton Jeanty is doing right now is absolutely crazy. This is like his second or third game where he's ran for over 200 yards. I would have to believe he's leading the country in rushing yards. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he had 4 touchdowns in this game. He had 259 rushing yards. This guy is an absolute beast. This was definitely a big win for Boise State, and they managed to beat Washington State 45-24. And lastly, we had the Week 6 AP poll drop. And to no surprise, Alabama is the #1 team in the country. Alabama only beat Texas by 24 votes, but they are the #1 team, and I think that is well deserved. Georgia drops to number 5. I like that they didn't drop them too low, because Georgia really fought back in this game, and I do think we saw spark from them. If they could start clicking on all cylinders, they will make their way back to the top, and I truly believe that. We also saw Ole Miss drop all the way to number 12. That's definitely justifiable. That was a terrible loss to Kentucky. You could honestly drop them lower than that. Oregon starting to jump their way back into the rankings at number 6. They jumped Miami and Ole Miss. Oregon's definitely having a good turnaround to the season. I can't necessarily say it was a turnaround because they haven't lost a game, but they are definitely getting better every week, and that's all that matters sometimes. Now, Iowa State's also jumping up to the rankings. They jumped up 2 spots to number 16. They are the highest ranked Big 12 team, but what about right behind them? BYU at number 17, jumping up 5 spots. I don't know how I feel about that. They only beat Baylor by 6 points. I don't know if they really deserve to jump that high. But regardless, you have 3 Big 12 teams right together, Iowa State, BYU, and Utah. And then a couple of spots behind them, you have Kansas State. Like I said, the Big 12 is completely wide open. We also see a team like Indiana jumping into the top 25. They haven't played anybody yet, but they have looked super dominant. I do think that is deserved. Maybe you could put Arizona in the top 25. That was a good win over a top 10 team, but they're still not ranked. But regardless, they have UNLV at 25. They were actually tied with Texas A&M with 122 votes, but this graphic has them at number 25. I'm kind of glad Texas A&M isn't ranked because I don't think they are a top 25 team. There are some changes to this top 25, and here you have it. That's the AP poll for Week 6. But anyways, that is going to do it for today's video. Let me remind you guys to like the video and also subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And if you guys love college football, then you'll love this channel because we upload a ton of college football content and we basically cover everything on this channel. So definitely consider subscribing. And also consider checking out my socials down in the description below. But that is going to do it, guys, and peace out.